Welcome back to the Chasing Happiness podcast, an honest podcast about finding happiness, what it really means, and the process of getting there. My name is Crystal, and today I have the pleasure of speaking with Chris Delaney, who has started a movement through the Clubhouse app and is taking it off platform with a community of people who, as you guys know, if you're listening to this podcast, have become like family to me through the Intentional Connector community. So, Chris, for everybody who is listening to this podcast and doesn't have the pleasure of knowing you through the Clubhouse app like I do you want to just give a bit of an explanation as to who you are and sort of what you do?
Sure. Yeah, I'm excited to be here with you on the Chasing Happiness podcast, and I'm really, really thankful and grateful for the role that you've played in kind of the community that's been growing and developing. It still is pretty wild to think that it's been just over 4 months of being on Clubhouse, and this thing has expanded as rapidly as it has because it's been something I've been developing for the last 5 years. So I think just to kind of give like the 30-second view of who I am, I'm just somebody who has had a lot of life experience going through challenges such as I lost my mom to a 21-year battle of stage 4 breast cancer, basically from birth till I was 21. And then from there, I was pretty much on my own. And so the journey for me has been deeply steeped in trying to understand more about the legacy that she left for me, which was really understanding how somebody could live as long as she did with an illness like that. And it led me to really question conventional wisdom, all these things that we get taught about, the way that we should look at the world, the way that we should think about expertise. And it just led me to be a really challenging, I just challenge everything that I see a lot. And that can be really frustrating. But I spent most of my 20s doing what you traditionally do, which is work in the corporate world and try to find a career and a place to be, sure. Which for me as a millennial was predominantly trying to figure out how to get a title, a paycheck, and a good retirement, right? And I found myself burnt out. So by the time I was 31, 10 years after my mom passed, I went through my divorce, left the corporate world, and just didn't know what was going to happen next. I just knew something had to change. So since then, in 2016, I pretty much have just failed my way forward, but learned entrepreneurship really through necessity. It wasn't like I was on social media and was really excited about the memes and the posts. It was more so I really wanted to be free to produce my own income. I really wanted to learn how to understand how to serve people with my story and the gifts that I had. And so it's been a continual evolution of how I do that through things like coaching and consulting, using my life experience and kind of my own methodologies for how I've navigated that space in high performance. I work a lot with very high performing entrepreneurs really struggling to figure out where that clarity piece is between the vision in their minds, the intention, and kind of the execution, whether it's in their relationships. Most of them are breaking through and scaling a business and really focusing on how do you bring impact and purpose into that business model. And then I love working with creatives because for me, I'm a creative who uses business. I'm not necessarily the person who paints or sings. I just love to create businesses that are really going to have an impact in the world. So Clubhouse has really opened up an avenue for me, which I love, which is voice and audio. So instead of podcasting or creating YouTube content, when I came to Clubhouse, I was like, man, this is an incredible avenue to just get in there and have great conversations because I'm an extrovert. I was holed up during COVID as well. And once I understood what Clubhouse was, I mean, there's no stopping me. I just went all in, invested in the audio and really have been focusing on having as much fun as I can and meeting incredible people. So I'm just open to where everything is going and really, really thankful for, sticking with that original vision that I had. So it's a little bit about me and based out of Orlando, Florida. Love it down here. I'm originally from upstate New York, so I am a New Yorker at heart. So you hear me talk about coffee every once in a while. And I just never meet a stranger. I'm very optimistic about people and really understanding more about their story and kind of this idea of connection, which for me is defined as how do we begin to let that humanness kind of dissolve and we meet soul to soul and kind of have a really grounded discussion and really, live this life to the best of our abilities. So those are a few things about me without going crazy deep.
Well, I appreciate that, but I think crazy deep is kind of what you do. So for those who are listening to this podcast, I met Chris in what he calls his nighttime rooms on Clubhouse. And I believe one of the very first rooms that I walked into was a really in-depth conversation about like spirituality. And then like the next night, it was like, actually, I think it was one of the rooms Kasha was in. We were talking about fertility and women's issues. And you go deep with everything that you do. And it's one of the reasons why I love this community that you're creating, because I feel like, especially in the last year through COVID, as we've all struggled to make connections with people through Zoom and all of these other things, I feel like Clubhouse and these rooms and this community has given us something to sort of cling to. We can get to know people at a deeper level, and it feels like a more intimate conversation because of that.
Yeah. It's super interesting because the reason I'm attracted to Clubhouse is the way it made me feel initially. And it was because my view has always been to give as much as I possibly can because I've got me. And I think that's the journey is when I learned how to really find out what I wanted and got really clear. I talk about this a lot. We spend so much time, especially in the personal development space. I was a part of that for many years. We spend a lot of time organizing our environment to make it perfect. And we don't want to have negative thoughts and we don't want to have the law of attraction working against us and all these different things that we're fearful of. That oftentimes we project this persona. And this persona is like, just look at my light, look how wonderful I am and how perfect things are. Behind the scenes, I know there are a lot of people who are like me that felt isolated in the journey of entrepreneurship. And even making money didn't solve that. Or they felt like they were sacrificing a ton in their health or other categories of their life because there was ways of being successful. And I think that we ended up in this space of just doing so much. So when Clubhouse came to be in my life, it was by chance that I ended up in a room where we had mutual friends, and I helped this guy Archie, and just answered some questions about his business. He was confused, and I was like, "Let me help. I can certainly help you." 2 hours later, like we had a really emotional, breakthrough, and he'd said he'd spent money on coaching and other stuff as well, and nobody had helped him to that depth, and he was deeply thankful, and that just felt really good. And I was like, I just want to keep doing that.
Right.
So I just kept chasing that feeling, which is what I talk about in the morning rooms all the time. Is what's that feeling you want to have when you close your eyes when you go to sleep? For me, it's vibrance, abundance, and freedom. I want to feel vibrant, which is in my vibrational state of giving and also feeling really good. I want to feel abundant, which is being able to give and to receive as well, both sides. And I want to be, I want to be free, vibrant, abundant, and free. And free for me is being able to pursue the things that are interesting to me and not be chained down to anything. And so Clubhouse just represented this interesting opportunity to dive deep on a topic like business or branding or whatever, and then switch gears into let's talk about a topic that typically we would hold off on because I'm super interested in the raw conversation. I want to get into the conversations that allow us to be human as opposed to authentic. And I think there's a difference. I think authenticity has been this buzzword that becomes how can I get that persona that I created before to be a little bit more relatable versus how can I actually be the true raw essence of who I am. However, caveat, without making it about my need for you to validate me. And I think that's the difference, right? That needy energy of being seen, heard, and understood. If we can really be human beings and be open to the conversations that we're kind of fumbling around in, and there's curiosity and stuff that we're interested in, I think Clubhouse, especially at the time when I joined, was just so open to have courageous conversations about race, about religion, about spirituality, about, fertility, because these are big issues. And I can just listen in, and I can also be a part of the conversation because I genuinely want to learn. I have a huge desire to just learn perspectives from people.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that certainly has attracted me as well as others who I've invited into the Clubhouse space. It's hard to have real conversations, especially face to face with people sometimes. Yeah. And I feel like because Clubhouse has removed that aspect of it, people can be a little more open without the fear of judgment. There is a little less of that pretense to judge how people are looking, standing, feeling while they're talking. And I think it allows people to be a lot more vulnerable in a way that they wouldn't in another platform. So I'm 100% with you as far as that goes. Since you talked about the morning intention room, do you want to let people who maybe aren't aware of this intention room or much about Clubhouse, what exactly you're doing? Because they've heard me talk about it through the podcast more than once, as well as on my Facebook and my Instagram. But I think the movement you're creating is so much bigger than I think I can verbalize. So I will leave it up to you.
Yeah, I love that. I love that you're giving life to this idea of a movement because that's what I wrote down a few years ago when I was sitting down thinking about it. And really at the core of it, it's based around this idea that I have around what does it mean to be intentional? For me, backstory, it was waking up at 31 years old and coming to the stark realization that these things that happened in my life that I used to say was just like, it had to be a circumstantial thing of just random shit that came together and things just happened. And then I started taking a deep dive and looking back and I was like, I was a part of that. I made that decision. This is what happened. And I started asking myself that question, what could I have done differently? Like, what one versus the question, what do I want? Which I think is a difficult question because it's a broad question, but also broad questions give us an opportunity to say how we're feeling in that moment. The second thing is I started realizing that I never once really looked at my emotions. In fact, I compartmentalized and pushed them aside for such a long time and ran in fear for most of my life for fear of opening that Pandora's box up because I didn't have the tools to do this and having a psychotic break in all reality because I was dealing with PTSD and anxiety and so many different things. But at the end of the day, the question really was, if I'm in control and I can pursue what I want to pursue, if I have that freedom to do so, and we all have this, by the way, then what would I pursue? What would be interesting? And who do I become in that process? And that's where it became about being intentional. One became about having a really clear vision of what I wanted to create, regardless of what I thought was possible or realistic. The second thing was, is it interesting for me to pursue it, even if I don't get it? And the question for me was, if I don't get it, is it okay? Well, I said the journey is way more important than the destination, because I live my life by milestone to milestone. Once you get somewhere, you feel something. And then I said, what if I just keep having the feeling I want to have? That feels way better than just constantly going through life, being upset, frustrated, and miserable. And it was something that had to be integrated over years and years of conscious repetition of feeding my mind this belief system around the idea that I can only control what I can control. I surrender to the rest. I'm totally open, and I don't know what's going to happen, but I'm open to it. So the intention setting room comes from a practice that I have daily, and I've had for the last 4 or 5 years, which is just asking myself this question. I have this great to-do list. Who am I to be today? And as I show up in these conversations, these interactions that I have, how do I choose to show up? Otherwise, I'm assuming I'm a victim of circumstance all the time. And what I started noticing is, as I started tracking this and looking back each night and reflecting, I found that I showed up the way I intended to. My intention matched my reality, because I struggled so long with intentions not meeting reality in relationships and other things as well. So I started seeing this correlation, and I was like, this is amazing. And I started testing it out with other people and sharing that with them, and they started seeing a change as well. So the morning intention setting room is just a simple Clubhouse room. It's an hour long. We've been going for about 120 plus days now. So it's over 4 months of me just coming in and asking the question, who are you becoming today? And when your head hits the pillow, how do you want to feel? And it's amazing that one simple format has led to people hosting rooms because they feel confident, relationships that are built like family, and the consistency of that small habit, an hour a day of my time, doing something I normally would do on my own anyways, has led to an incredible community of people around this idea of intention. And it's threaded through everything between business, between, again, marketing, branding, the relationship building, everything that we're doing, because that really is the whole focus. If I know what your intentions are and I understand that you're living with intention, then it's easy for me to trust you. It's completely open for me to trust you. We don't have to worry about anything else. And that's why I love this process and that idea of intention.
I love that. And you touched on so many things that I want to talk about. But first and foremost, the question that brings up for me to ask you is, when you started this, I imagine, like most people on Clubhouse, you had 1 or 2 people in the room. It has grown. You have this community of thousands of people that are standing with you now, and they may not all come into the room every day, but a lot of people have joined this 30-day challenge that you're doing. A lot of people are spreading the word. How does it feel? Because you've said it took, 5 years for you to get here. You wrote this down. You had this intention. It's been a process, which I think is a great lesson for everyone. But how does it feel now that it's all sort of coming to life and it's actually, starting to be this movement that you had hoped for?
My human response to this is, it feels just as it should be, as I thought it was going to be, which is it feels great, but also normal to me. You know what I mean? Because it makes sense. And it wasn't, I'm not like surprised by this at all, because if I'm true to the focus of what I do, then this was just timing. Right. And I think that's the key thing that I want people to take away from this is you can work for years, decades, and it's that spark, that opportunity, that divine timing, that when everything comes together, it's the law of gestation. The thing is ready to be planted and harvested. And I think it took a lot of work on Clubhouse to get here right now. And even though there was 5 years of ideation and businesses and partnerships and everything else, the reality is, and I've talked about this before, I spent 12 to 14 hours a day on Clubhouse between January and March to pave the way for community, because there had to be somebody who's going to kick the door down, get on stages and talk about this stuff in order to attract people to the message. So it feels very fulfilling and it's very satisfying. But it's also a normal part of my life because it makes sense. I trust in all the things I'm putting in motion. And it's just, I just can't say enough about it being satisfying, but I can't imagine living a different life than I'm living right now. It's not as if celebrity status happened or anything like that. I think it just is, help people feel really good. And that to me is the ultimate currency. When you help people feel good and you help them feel accepted, seen, heard, and understood, and the vibe that you bring to the table, and you're present, you're intentional with your energy, then everything in your life will shift and change.
I think that's such a huge thing for people to hear who are listening to this podcast, because I think especially over the last year, most of us don't feel seen. We don't feel heard. We don't feel understood by any means because there's such a divisiveness in North America in general, not just in the United States. And I think it's one of the things that I absolutely love about you and this community because for anyone who walks into this room, there's an immediate acceptance. If you become a part of this family, which is what I've started calling it when I talk to people about it, if you become a part of this family, you instantly are connected with people who are attempting to, be the best version of themselves every day. And some days we fall down, some days we struggle, some days we come into the room and we cry. And it's all okay because it's all part of the human experience. And I think for everyone listening, it's absolutely worth it to check out the community, to go to the website. Chris, do you want to tell people who are listening how they can take part in either 30 days or just join the community, whether it's on Clubhouse or off? Because I know you plan on rolling out off platform as well.
Yeah, we've been working hard on creating a space for the community off of Clubhouse. So we'll be diving into that in the first week of June. So we're going to have resources. We're going to start rolling out opportunities about events and things of that nature as things begin to open up. The best thing I would say is you can definitely check out the Instagram first, which is at The Intentional Connector, which will be our community Instagram on there. So people can kind of follow in there. It'll be featuring members of our community. The 30 days of intention will be kind of shifting into a different format to kind of make it a little bit more digestible for folks who may not have been in the rooms the entire time. We kind of rolled that out to like our OG community members who are really looking for something to sink their teeth into. Right. So I think the other best thing to do is to come feel the room. So if you're new to Clubhouse, what I love about it is so many people have said, this was the first room I joined. This is the first time I was on Clubhouse, and it gave me the feeling I wanted to have to go enjoy this, because Clubhouse is intimidating. How often do you have an opportunity to wake up, go about your day, and then go into a room with 400 strangers potentially and get up on a stage and share your thoughts? Right. If you didn't spend a few years getting ready for that moment, that's intimidating as hell. So that's where we're really focusing in on how can we make this platform as available to people as possible. We have incredible people in our community who are also working from the accessibility route. So we have so many great people who taught us how to navigate the spaces of working with people who are deaf, who have a hard time seeing or blind, so that we could be more inclusive. And we've also had some amazing conversations around mental health with professionals, right? People who are trauma informed. We've had incredible conversations about race, about masculine and feminine energy. We run the gamut of things, because I think the biggest thing that I loved about Clubhouse, if you did it with intention, was people were willing to collaborate. So that's why I think Clubhouse would probably be the best space for people to come check out. And then the Instagram would be great. You can go to intentionalconnector.com, and you can also grab the recorded meditation I put together from the room that we were doing. And those are a couple different ways you can kind of interact with everything.
Perfect. Thank you. I appreciate that. I also want to ask you, because you mentioned sort of how your life has led you to this point, and people who are familiar with my podcast know my story. Although there are similarities, it's different. But I basically woke up in my early 30s one morning running a business that I despised, and sold the business, sold 80% of everything I owned, and moved across the country because I needed to change my life and I didn't know how. So can you explain a little for people who maybe might be in a point in their life sort of where they're struggling or where they're not sure how to make that sort of shift in their life? Because that's a pretty big shift in mindset, in lifestyle that you've gone through over the last 5 or 6 years. Can you explain how you sort of walked through that process?
Yeah, I'll give, a 4-step framework. And I say this, but it's underpinned by a few things that I think are super important. There's one, we basically live a life of automation depending upon everything that we've taken in by the time we're 8 or 9 years old. So we have learned everything about authority, autonomy, independence, influence, manipulation, love, all kinds of things before we're even old enough to rationalize what death is. And then what happens is we live this life where essentially it's momentum driven by habit. And habits work for or against, but most times we have no idea where we're going to in the first place. So we just kind of do what we think is like, are we doing this right? Okay, they're doing that, right. We do it too, right? And then we awaken, typically, I found that it's like late 20s, early 30s, sometimes later, depending upon, and generationally, I'm seeing a little bit of a shift in this. And by the way, I'm also somebody who looks for data. So I'm also somebody who's grounded in data. So I'm not looking at just my personal experience. I'm looking at data from working with people and checking stuff out.
Sure.
So what happens is whenever we get shifted into what I see between the relationship between circumstance and information, those two things are in a feedback loop back and forth continually. So whatever your circumstance is, you see certain information, that information informs you to then live or shift that circumstance.
Right.
The only two things that can shift us are an intense emotional experience. God forbid you have a heart attack. Doctor says to you, if you eat another French fry, your heart's going to explode. You're gonna kill, right? Or you got to get some exercise. Now, even that's tricky because you have to value the outcome. You have to value what's on the other side of that choice. The second way to do that, which is the non-sexy way, which is where a lot of us struggle, is repetition. And the repetition has to be meaningful and has to be paired with an emotion and has to be driven. Most of our lives were spent driven away from pain. So we get pushed by pain. And then the other side of it is that we don't really understand how to really be pulled by vision towards pleasure, because typically we don't choose what we want because we think we're going to be selfish and be seen a certain way. Most of our lives is spent focusing on the external world. So the first step for me has always been really learning how to tap into the other half of our lives, which is our internal world. We have to slow things down. We have to become really the mouth of that river and slow things down. So we go through this process of awareness. And in this process of awareness, we're seeking for clarity, which is where's the decision I have to make for the greatest impact in my life, the greatest value. And that breaks down into an easy exercise. I call it 4 quadrants. Look at your life, draw X, Y axis. Each quadrant is for them. It would be financial, business. It would be relationships, conscious, spiritual. And then you go over to health and you take a look at these, and to ground it into something rational, we put it on a scale of 1 to 10. What would be a 10 for you in your life right now? If all other factors considered didn't matter, what would a 10 be for you right now? So let it rip. What do you want? Put it down. And then you gauge yourself on that scale of 1 to 10. Where do you find yourself? And then the simple question is, between you and that 10, what stands in your way? What are the obstacles? What resources, people, relationships, environmental factors need to shift and change? So that brings us to a good awareness of kind of what's there. And then we go into like, what's really stopping you? Well, I'll give us the short answer. It's us. We're standing in our own way because we don't believe we can either have it or there's things that we're doing. We're always in that control period. We go through the process of unlearning, which is the second phase, which is really, really understanding all the things that need to be shifted, all the things that we've learned that we never chose. So where you live, what you eat, your religious beliefs, all these things, when did you choose them consciously? When did you sit down and examine amongst all the choices in the world that this is what you chose? So if you have a spouse right now, did you date? And this is a ridiculous question, but did you date, 6 billion people to find your spouse?
Sure.
No, but the whole point is, why not? Why didn't we do that? What's going on? So we had to make some assumptions in there. So we're basically just uncovering all these assumptions and things that we did. The third piece of that is, or the next piece of that is we start looking at, if we didn't choose it, what would we choose if given the choice? So then we start asking ourselves the question, what do I choose as far as what I believe? Like, what would guide my decision making? Something as simple for me was like, I said I didn't like sushi for years until I was like 26, 27 years old. I was like, hate sushi, it's gross. Never tried it once. The moment I tried it, I was like, this opened up a whole nother experience for me. I was like, this is insanity. So I say that because all things are connected. How we do anything is how we do everything. So we go into this next process, which is, as we're doing the conscious repetition, we go into the awakening phase, which is things begin to fall apart and chaos ensues because you're now choosing things differently. You're going to show up differently to the people around you. You're going to show up differently to the environments around you. And the feedback that you're going to receive externally isn't going to match your previous experience.
Right.
So that's where really the magic happens, is that's the process. The conscious repetition over 90, 120, a full year has to happen of continually reminding yourself, getting back into it, falling off, coming back to it. Until you start getting to this point, what I call conscious creation, which is you are now working from a standpoint of sovereignty. This is a big word. And I've been working with this and constantly figuring out how to explain it. But for me, sovereignty basically is defined as my need for validation and my sense of self-worth is no longer defined by my external environment. I am sitting in the center of my decisions and I'm doing it for the sake of what I believe to be my intention. And my intentions are good because I'm connected to my heart. And I'm doing it because I desire to do it, not because I'm being forced to do it. And that to me is a very powerful place to be, because that's where you can start holding space for people. That's where you can really lead with intention. And that's where you can really focus in on really exploring and living life, in my opinion, to the greatest ability that you possibly can.
And that's huge. And I think right before that step is probably where a lot of people get hung up, right?
You probably go through the dark night of the soul. You go through all kinds of stuff. Shit just falls apart. And I found that it falls apart in 3 ways: your finances, your relationships, and your health will all be impacted. Those three areas that are most important to us, because health, we're always constantly worried about something happens, we're going to die.
Sure.
Money, it's tied into everything. Your sense of autonomy, your decision making, everything is there. And then your relationships, because again, this is where I tell people, let people who you care about in your life know the journey that you're on, or even invite them, but don't tell them what to do, because nobody wants to be told what to do.
Right.
Because as you shift and change, the responsibility now goes on you. So many people I meet are going through this enlightenment period, and they go off telling people what to do. And I'm like, that's not leadership. Leadership is becoming the example. So others say, I'm interested. And then you point them in the direction of the resources. That to me is the embodiment of leadership.
I love that. And I have so many other questions, but I do want to be respectful of your time. Okay. So first question then is, how on earth do you go from a place or a mindset of the world is basically the way that it is up to, you said we learn everything, before we're 8. The world is what it is. How do you get past that constant thought process of, but the world has told me for 30 some odd years, this is what it is? Because you're 100% right. And going through this 30 days of intention with you, one of the things that I have struggled with is the unlearning process, because for 40 years, the world has told me that I don't deserve certain things. And in the back of my mind, every time I go to achieve them, that's what's there. So how do you get past that?
Yeah. I mean, it's time and repetition, and that's the one thing that I can't say enough about. And that's why so many people end up going to major events. They'll go drop serious money on events, masterminds, and then they'll go home and then the entire thing falls apart.
Right.
If you think about bringing it to the most basic point, if again, if the assumption is how we do anything is how we do everything, think about what happens at the end of the year. We go into our New Year's intentions and our resolutions, and we go get a gym membership. And then we go do a workout for 16, 17 days. It's hard, because then the next piece is also the diet. And then we add a bunch of other stuff on. And we're not also shifting our environment to make sure that we're supporting that change. Little things like I did everything, and I still do everything that I possibly can to manage my brain, because our brain are decision-making and association machines. So I don't want to blame my brain. I want to put it in a position to be successful. Same thing with my relationships. I trust consistency more than anything. So if I know somebody is just who they are, even if they're offensive, even if they lie, I trust that more than if they lie to my face or behind my back, and then to my face are super, super calm and super nice. If they just are who they are, I can understand, I can navigate that.
Right.
So it's all about that consistency, which builds trust, and we build it with ourselves too. So it's just one step at a time. What happens is initially it's like, this is really hard. This is really tough. And you're like, oh man, that is super tough. Okay. I'm noticing it now. I'm seeing the triggers that happen. I'm seeing where I'm falling apart, where I'm falling down. I'm seeing the gaps or the obstacles that come up for me. Around this time is when things happen. Around this time, this event that happens. And then we start to witness it. You know that things are shifting when you just witness it, and then you witness your reaction versus being your reaction. And then you can witness the reaction and you can say, that's really interesting. I'm curious. Curiosity, that language right there, removes judgment. And that curiosity allows us to see it for what it is and then say, I didn't really like that so much. Okay, awesome. So it's like every single time is just an incremental small shift. Because I used to deal, and still did deal up until last year, a lot with frustration. When I would have certain things happen in my life and I felt like I was pushing harder and I couldn't understand why I was experiencing this frustration. Well, there was something coming up within me about trust. There was something coming up within me. It's a continual process. I'm on day 1300 and something of the same process. And then I say to myself, there it is. Okay, what do I do with this? Pen and paper, get to pen and paper. Where did it happen? What was said? What was felt? How did I experience it? Do I want that anymore? Hell no, I don't want that feeling anymore. Okay, what do I want instead? This is what I want. And I'm going to continually keep making steps towards it. No different than if I built a muscle in my body. No different than if I was focusing on building a business. Small incremental shifts that are not sexy, but required for this process.
I love that you describe it that way, because I talk often on this podcast about you have to do the work. If you want change, you have to do things differently. And it's not pretty. And a lot of times it's very messy and ugly and can cause chaos in life.
Yep.
But it's important to do the work, because there is no quick fix for anything. So I love that you describe it that way. If you could imagine where this will all lead, because I'm sure you've thought through that process, knowing you a little bit as I do. Where do you see this going, this movement that you're creating?
Yeah, I think within the year that we'll be into a full-blown ecosystem where we're able to get more ideas out there. There definitely are some books in the process right now that I want to get out into the world as a better way to kind of scale the idea to a lot more folks. The most immediate impact I want to have is in the business world, especially with really cultivating and finding. My mission on Clubhouse has been to find the emerging thought leaders that are coming to the table who don't have huge followings, but I didn't have one either when I came to Clubhouse, and help them accelerate their process. So within the next year, definitely want to establish, our community as a physical and also digital location for people to go to as a hub. In the next 5 years, I would love for us to be in a space where we're actually full blown producing film, producing media content, really impacting the way that we're producing content in a way, because how we learn through the emotions of content is beautiful. Through animation, through some other stuff, I have some really great ideas and great people around me who are helping me bring that to fruition. One of which is the idea of immersive events, which is how can we do something like having 40,000 people together in a stadium using some kind of wearable technology that when you hear a meditation, you can actually see it with your own eyes, so that we can actually see what would be happening in the process of doing this meditation together in real time.
Oh my God.
That'd be pretty epic, and utilizing music and really creative folks. Within 10 years, definitely want to be established in that space where we're focusing in on doing impact investing. So accelerating ideas from people who really want to bring it together, because the biggest problem they're going to have is capital, and also the engines for media and marketing, which is where a lot of people I know who are very talented, who aren't really in it for the validation. A lot of folks spiritually bypass, but I've met so many embodied leaders who just aren't business leaders, and they need that support. And that's where I want to be, to either utilize capital and people to help. And I really think that, when I'm 50 years from now, I've always envisioned a table with 20 to 25 people in my meditations, and really thinking about those are the people who shape the world, right? Those are the people who have the kind of global impact, various parts of the world that can really, have their fingers in the influence that need to happen for benevolence. And that's my grand desire is to be able to work through and use my talents and gifts to connect with those people and really focus on things that matter at a global scale.
I have absolutely no doubt that you will get there. I imagine much quicker than you think probably at this point, just based on talking to people in the community. And for everyone listening to this podcast, I cannot with words do justice for the collection of people that have come together as part of this family. You have to experience it. You have to sort of be a part of the process, because there is so much beyond just the support of the community. I cannot even envision what my life was like 3 months ago before I met you and all of these wonderful people. So I have no doubt you will get there. I do typically end the podcast by asking 4 questions of all of my guests. Are you game to answer?
I am down.
So the first question is, what is either the best piece of advice you've ever been given or the worst piece of advice you've ever been given, and why?
Ooh, best or worst piece? I think the best piece of advice I've been given recently came from my good friend Delano Johnson. And he just looked at me and he said, Chris, don't be afraid to lead. And it just hit me hard, because it was a moment in time where, it's when you're mission driven and impact driven, so many people want to help and they want to be a part of the mission. And there does have to be a sense of, and I have an advisor, Tim Rothschild, who's amazing as well. He's a non-dual Kabbalistic healer that I've been working with for about a year and such. And he's an incredible sounding board. He also said to me, don't be afraid to let your ego lead sometimes. And that to me was a really important piece of advice, because we get taught, or we think about it like, don't let your ego get involved. But that wildly preferential human being that's a part of me, that has that wild ambition and passion, is also the one that has to kick down doors in order to make things happen sometimes. And I think knowing when to let that happen, knowing when to let your shadow lead, knowing when to just lead, period. Because people, if we don't have a captain of the ship goes nowhere. We have to know what's going on. Yeah.
That's huge. And I love that you talk about the ego, because so much of this space, especially in the self-improvement area, is about let go of your ego. Don't have an ego at all in some circumstances. So I love that you talk about it the way that you do, especially in the rooms, because I think it's important for us to acknowledge it is part of who we are. Even if we need to dampen it down at certain times, it's still a part of who we are and it's never going anywhere. So finding a way, as you were saying earlier, to make it work with you rather than against you, I think is vitally important. So thank you for that. Okay, next question. If you could go back in time and give yourself any piece of advice, what would it be?
I've actually done this in meditation. And there was a meditation I had that's been really impactful. It's actually driven a lot of my vision. It happened about a year and a half ago, and I was going through some challenges. I spent some time in like the masculinity space, doing some work with men and even on my own healing. And there was some heavy work that I really had to do with me as a boy, kind of going through the challenges I went through as a kid. And the meditation had me sitting behind myself. And I was about 7 or 8, and I was coming as I am now. Because part of my story has always been about, instead of looking for somebody to save me, I became the man who became that for myself. And so the meditation had me coming behind him, and it was dark around us. It was very scary for him. And I was so resolute and so consistent and structured with him. And I sat down and I said, just look out in the darkness and really accept what is, see your heart. And in the darkness came through this massive lion. And the lion came through, started sniffing at us. And I could tell that me as a child was very fearful, didn't know what to do. And I said, put your hand out. And he put his hand out. And then the lion came over and started sniffing the hand and rubbed his head up against it and just sat down in front of us. And the whole meditation, the message was that people won't know. I mean, it's kind of similar. We've heard this before about people don't care what you say or do. It's how you make them feel. Right. But for me, it's not about what you do. It's not about what you say. Those gifts are great. But the most important thing is going to be about the fact that your heart's going to be felt in ways that you can't even fathom. And so for me as that little boy, it was more about really embodying that presence of what that lion represented. And to know that you didn't have to do anything to be what that was, powerful, present, and capable. So that was really powerful for me.
Wow. That's so huge. Before I get to the other two questions, for people who don't meditate, you talk often in the rooms about it's okay if you've never meditated. It's okay if you float while you meditate. Doesn't matter where you are in between. Can you tell people the importance from your point of view of at least attempting some form of meditation, even if that's, 2 minutes while you're stirring your coffee in the morning? What is that importance to this spiritual growth?
Yeah, I mean, meditation at its core is just allowing us to tap into a different brainwave state, to get out of that conscious mind that is so focused and limited into a space that taps into subconscious and higher brain frequency. So if you think about it this way, before you go to sleep, melatonin is going into your system and you're getting tired. Your body's preparing essentially to meditate. You're going into a meditative state before you fall asleep. But when you take a nap, same thing, because your body's going into that delta wave state before it goes, or into theta before it goes into delta. So as those brain waves begin to slow down and you have less consciousness, you're tapping into something greater. So one thing you can do, something super simple if you want to test this out, is think of a problem that you have right now. Think of something that you're trying to solve, and then write it down as you're getting ready to fall asleep. And don't allow yourself to get distracted by anything else, social media or whatever. Really focus for one night and allowing yourself to sit with this in a journal or a piece of paper. Just write the question down. Like and don't write it down in a disempowering way. Like don't say something to the effect of, why am I so bad at running this business?
Right.
Something to the effect of, what would it look like for me to really master becoming a leader of my business? Something like that. And then just let it go, put it on the table, and then literally sit with it for a moment, see how it feels, and then go to sleep and wake up in the morning and see what happens. And as you do this, maybe even for a few days, you'll start to notice that you're going to think differently about that problem that you're looking at, because you're accessing higher functioning of the mind to actually be able to work with this problem. Einstein said you can't solve a problem with the same line of thinking that created the problem in the first place. And so that's why, they would utilize these ideas of meditation, which was falling asleep, waking up, going, and they would work with this stuff. So it doesn't have to be super complicated. You don't have to sit in a certain position. Like for me, I just do it the way that comes to me, and allow yourself to catch your breath. And as you do this, what it's going to do is it's going to do things like reduce stress levels, hormone levels will begin to equalize over time. Your brain actually begins to shift and change in structure and form, because you're starting to open up new neural pathways. And it also brings a sense of calm to us. It allows us to really, really think from a different state, especially when we're dealing with emotional awareness as well. As you meditate more, you're going to be less reactionary. And you're also going to feel much more centered in conversations. You'll start noticing that you're much more aware of your feelings versus your feelings driving your actions. You're going to start to realize that you have more control in your life as well. So those are just a few things. Also, you start diving into things like calming your nervous system, dealing with inflammatory responses, things like that.
Which is huge. And you describe it so much better than I have in typical podcasts. So I appreciate you going through that. The next question that I have for you is, what's the one thing about yourself that you want to work on?
I mean, I've been working on it right now, which is, I'm not about balance. I'm about integration. And I'm also a hyper realist. I'm very rational about a lot of things. I tend to lead with rationale and then back it up with intuition. As much as I can, but I'm also learning on letting my intuition lead often. So for me, it's been health, because I know that when I first came into Clubhouse, I do this process where I learn about what has to be given up in order for me to make space for this. And so one of those things was really working out. I was working out on a regular basis. I just knew that because I was going to have a new habit come in, I had to really create space. And so I consciously allowed myself to have some chaos, which is totally fine. So I allowed myself to have that chaos for about 60 days. And then for the last, I would say 47 days or so, I've actually been working with a coach, Kasha. So I completely went all in on my health, my diet, and also working out, which has been a big part of my life. So I've been very consistent with it, tracking, working with it. And that's where my design has been as far as that goes.
That's awesome. I love that. And I love that you addressed something that I've chatted about here on the podcast before is anytime we say yes to one thing, we're saying no inevitably to something else. Good, bad, or ugly, we're giving up something. So I love that you talked about intentionally sort of sacrificing that temporarily to get where you were going or where you needed to go, and then you could refocus. Because I think oftentimes what happens to us as humans is we think, oh, I failed at this day. I might as well throw in the towel forever. And we don't start over. We don't attempt to get back on track because we feel like, well, one day it's out the window. Why bother?
Yeah.
So I love that you spoke about that. Thank you.
Totally. I mean, here's the other thing too, is like uncertainty is the order of life, and so I think once we accept the idea that life is uncertain, we just do a really good job of focusing on what we can control only. And then we accept that chaos. That's a huge thing for me. The variety of life and allowing things to be a little bit chaotic. I mean, sometimes that can be a lot of fun, especially when you're living such a rigid life where you're like, this is my boundary. I mean, your growth and your experience is going to be just beyond the edges of that boundary. Sure. So that you can really live. Otherwise, you're going to die righteous, and that's not going to be fun at all.
That's very true. And let's face it, we all need to be having more fun, which is the whole point of all of this, I think.
I think so.
Okay, so the final question, because I do want to be respectful of your time, and I know we have our intention room at 8:00. So the last question is, what does happiness mean to you?
I think happiness to me is, humor is a big part of my life because I recognize so much of my life I suffered for the sake of other people. And I have this really interesting idea that I'm working on about suffering being a ritual that we do for others. For instance, like I think about, funerals, like the one I had for my mom and other stuff. And I've been to well over 40 or 50 funerals, and I've been to 2 weddings, one of which was my own when I was married and then divorced. And every single time it was just like this really strange space. And afterwards, like, what do you do with that? And now you have to mourn this person for the rest of your life, as opposed to celebrating and really thinking about like what the meaning of that person's existence was. And, they changed shapes, they changed forms, they changed consciousness or something like that. And so I've really looked at humor as a way for me to, like, when I laugh, like I'm all in on my laugh. It's not like a superficial, like, oh, that was kind of funny. It's like, I laugh really hard because to me, I mean, happiness is really being able to pick and choose where I spend my time, who I spend it with, and really being content, being right where I am in that moment. I've been blessed to be in great positions financially so many different times. And I've also been in positions where I've been very blessed to be in bad financial positions because those taught me exactly what I could live and live without. And every single moment I felt just as free as I do now. And so that to me is exactly it. Is that freedom of being able to choose who I can be in that moment and really, again, slow things down and be there with that as much as possible. So that's what happiness really is to me.
That's huge. The fact that you just described what most people would describe as a negative experience, a bad financial experience, as a blessing because it taught you things in the moment that you needed to learn. I think everyone listening to this podcast can take something from that, because the truth is we're all going to struggle sooner or later. We're all going to have some sort of a something that comes up, some sort of a speed bump that puts us in a position we never imagined we would be in. And how we choose to face that and look at that and be present with that determines where we go from there. So, wow, you are just an absolute gem. And I could talk to you for absolutely ever, but I do not want to take any more of your time. So I appreciate you agreeing to do this for me. I appreciate you creating this community. Like I said, this has become a family to me, and I cannot even remember what my life was like in February before I met you. So thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
And, I always tell people the same thing. To me, the time is given out of personal power. It's like, I really chose to be here, and I think we both did. So it's just as important that you gave your time and presence as well. And to everybody who's listening, like I always say, the beautiful life you desire is not a matter of chance. It's a matter of intention. And it really is. It's that pen and paper in front of you. What are you going to build with it? Are you going to write a hate note? Are you going to write a beautiful piece of poetry? It's totally your choice. What are you going to do with it?
That, my friend, is the whole reason that I have decided to change my business structure, is because of that sentence of yours, because how I spend my time is not how I want to be spending my time anymore. And I am getting far more out of this change that I'm making in my business based on living my life intentionally through that sentence of yours. So I appreciate that. Thank you. I will post in the show notes for everyone listening how you can find Chris and the community and get involved. And I cannot say enough good things about this man. So follow him, follow the journey, become part of this movement. And I am sending love and light to all of you. So thank you for listening.